UK legal aid reform news now, and well, for a start, even that title is slightly misleading, Andy, because legal aid in Britain is currently undergoing the kind of reform that a cow gets when it is reformed into a low-grade beef burger, or the kind of reform that a Spanish donkey experiences when it's thrown from a clock tower. This is going to seem quite inside baseball, this story, but the wider implications to this are worth sticking with, because they are fucking amazing. The government in Britain is currently introducing price competitive tendering, which is a nauseating term for an even more nauseating process. It basically cuts the balls from legal aid and replaces them with two child slinkies, which, sure, yes, they're technically a replacement, Andy, but they're not going to do any of the vital things that balls actually do. Now, this... like I say, this story is a little bit complicated, but it's worth sticking with, because when you finally get to the bottom of this, you realise that you are standing in an absolute whirlpool of shit.
Yeah, so price competitive tendering, I think, is political speak for flogging shit off and hoping things don't go more tits up than an acquisitive ornithologist in a hot air balloon. And what's happened is, as we mentioned last week, there's a prominent haulage firm, a lorry firm in this country called Eddie Stobart, and a subsidiary of Eddie Stobart Lawyers, has emerged as a leading contender in the bidding for this new generation of criminal legal aid contracts that would basically deprive defendants of the right to choose their own solicitor. Stobart Solicitors is the name, which is... The very name conjures up glorious images of lorry drivers doubling up as criminal lawyers, turning up at court with a copy of the Sun newspaper under their arm, saying to their client, "Mate, your picture's in the paper, you're clearly guilty." But it's not quite like that. Stobart's... the solicitor's bit, probably not that closely linked to the haulage firm, you hope, although you just never know these days, in these days of privatisation of... public services. And part of these proposals is to remove the right of defendants funded by legal aid to select their own solicitor. So, best of luck with that, crims. Sorry, defendants. That is one of the problems with the whole issue. It's such a grey area. Maybe the government is trying to clear it up by lumping them all together under the no smoke without fire clause of the Magna Carta. Paul Harris, the president of the London Criminal Court Solicitors Association, warned that the quality of legal representation would inevitably decline. How is anyone facing serious criminal allegations going to feel being represented by a haulage company, he asked. Well, they'll probably think it might be quite handy for an escape bid, I would imagine. But able to drive... And also, they'll save money. They'll be able to drive all the illegal immigrants straight to the courtroom and just scrape them off the bottom of the lorry.
The thing is, that is a key question. How is anyone facing serious criminal allegations going to feel being represented by a haulage company? They're going to feel, Andy, like an object with no value outside of a transaction. And that's exactly how they're supposed to feel under these plans. Under these plans, you are not a citizen with rights anymore. You're basically legal freight, just being moved around with a pound sign next to your face.
The Labour Party's Justice spokesman, Sadiq Khan, told the Law Society Gazette, "No one wants a second-rate system where you're forced to accept whatever representation you're given, regardless of quality." And that is clearly an outright lie, John. Some people clearly do want that, and those people include the government of this country. Now, we received this email from bugler Alistair King, who's a solicitor in Leighton Buzzard, the English town not far from Bedford, where you grew up when you were still English, John. And which gets its silly name, I think, from the third baseman in the 1955 World Series winning Brooklyn Dodgers team. Leighton Buzzard, of course, went on to have a successful career with other baseball franchises, including the Nashville Weirdos, the Tulsa Convulsors, the New York Forks, the El Paso Passovers, the short-lived Jewish baseball franchise, the Charlotte Brontosauruses, and that was never going to work out, having a franchise owned and run by someone obsessed by both paleontology and 19th century literature, and also concluded his career with the Sacramento Fascists. Sorry, where was I? Oh yeah, Alistair King's email from this solicitor, British solicitor, who wrote to us on this subject. "I'm a solicitor," he says, "who provides such services, so I cannot, as such, claim to be neutral or lacking in any self-interest. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the thought of losing my job, and the same happening to over 2/3 of my colleagues, excites a fair amount of self-interest. So obviously, as he said himself, this is only one side of the issue. So I've asked the government to send a minister from the Ministry of Justice onto the Bugle this week to explain their reforms from their side of the fence. Unfortunately, I asked them that while I was sitting alone in my shed, so they didn't hear or respond. So instead, I've guessed how the government would respond to Alistair's comments. So he writes, the scheme proposed by the government is called price competitive tendering. Now, to me, as a government minister, this sounds promising, John. Price competitive tendering sounds like a recipe for some quality cost savings. It's so complicated to judge tenders on things like quality and long-term sustainability and overall benefit for society. Judging it on price just simplifies everything down beautifully. This is the 21st century, Alistair. We're in tough economic times, and we have to take tough economic decisions. And we have to ask, what do the disabled actually do? How much GDP do they give to this nation? Was Shakespeare disabled? Was Churchill disabled? Was Isaac Newton disabled? Sure, his hair might have smelt of apples, but other than that, he was fine. And if they have to travel further, it might encourage them to be a bit less disabled in future. There are various other points on this, but basically he concludes, we are at real risk of destroying a legal system that, although not perfect, is the envy of the world and the model for many. And it is a bit of a concern, John, for a country which promotes its love of freedom and democracy and human rights so trumpetously that this has basically been lined up against the wall and shot at point-blank range. A few additional points were suggested to me by this hot chick who used to be a criminal barrister who I sleep with very occasionally. Don't tell the wife. Oh, no, actually, she is my wife. She said it's a staggering conflict of interest, but basically become unworkably expensive to allow your client to pursue a trial, so clients will be pressurised to plead guilty in order to save money. It's almost incomprehensibly idiotic, this scheme. And the problem is that everyone hates lawyers, basically, so it's kind of an easy target for government cuts, and lawyers are all lumped together, the ones who represent the poor and destitute in their hours of greatest need and darkness, lumped together with the ones who represent multi-billion-pound corporations with a severe allergy to tax. All bloody lawyers making a killing. It's all pretty depressing, John. Makes you think, what the is this country all about?
The measures have been introduced by MP Chris Grayling, and you can't say the words Chris Grayling, Andy, without saying the words not because the letters are the same, just because it's an innate human response to the concept of the man. And these measures were contained in a document quietly released on the day of Margaret Thatcher's death and do not require a vote in Parliament, which is such a shady way of putting them in, Andy, that if he had any integrity, Grayling, he'd have done it wearing a cape and twirling a handlebar moustache. Basically, the British government is looking for a way to reduce the £2 billion that is spent on legal aid, ideally by a couple of £100 million. And to do this, the plan is to introduce factory justice of the flimsiest kind. Essentially, as you mentioned, any defendant who cannot afford to pay for lawyers will no longer be able to choose a legal aid provider. They will be forcibly assigned one, and these legal experts will then be paid a single flat fee for the case, regardless of how well they perform in it, how long the case takes, or whether or not the client pleads guilty, which seems at first, second, and 99th glance to offer a clear financial incentive to the lawyer to have their client plead guilty. These new factory firms, Andy, will apply for new legal aid contracts, and qualifying bids must be at least 17.5% beneath the current rate. So from there, in general, contracts will go to those who offer to do the work for the lowest price, which I'm sure the lowest price has always offered the highest service, Andy. We know that.
Yeah.
They're not just going to be cutting corners on this. They're going to be psychotically attacking corners with a fucking chainsaw. And in order to guarantee winning firms receive a sufficient number of cases per year, the Ministry of Justice in Britain is proposing to remove the right of defendants to select their own solicitor. In other words, even if you think the lawyer that you've been assigned is terrible, you can't fire them, you're just stuck with them. And if that isn't bad enough, which it comfortably is, Andy, it's bad enough by a long shot, then firms apparently aren't going to know whether they've won these contracts until June of next year, giving them a massive 3 months in which to recruit staff and prepare to start work in September 2014. You do not want to have committed a crime by September the 2014, Andy. Or, even worse, be accused of committing a crime that you did not commit. Bad timing on your part, that would be. And, as you say, Andy, lawyers are not the most sympathetic characters, which is how you know that these suggestions are truly horrifying. Because if a story's making you feel bad for lawyers, that story must be pretty astonishingly fucking bleak.
Michael Turner, QC, the chair of the Criminal Bar Association, said that the criminal bar will become the preserve of rich white males. Corporate firms will move in, and barristers will eventually work in-house. The independent-minded judiciary will disappear as a corporate ethos takes over. To which the government's response was, oh, well, this all seems to be going exactly according to plan. And how much is this going to save the government, John, all these cutbacks to our great legal tradition? £220 million a year, which will pay for the upkeep of our Trident nuclear bang bang programme for 1 month. So that's worth every single penny.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, the firms involved are even more worrying. It does seem like this haulage firm, this f***ing haulage firm, is likely to win a significant bid in this. A haulage firm. You're literally going to be treated like a crate that needs to be moved. What more confidence can you have in your lawyer than knowing that they come from a haulage firm? A haulage firm, Andy.
Well,
haulage firm.
It's a successful haulage firm, John. I'm sure there's transferable skills.
They've
putting
complained.
things in boxes and putting them in the back of a lorry, and putting defendants in boxes and putting them in the back of a prison. You know, it's not that different, is it?
If you look at it that way, it isn't. If you look at it a different way, it definitely is. This haulage firm have complained that they've been getting emails from angry lawyers telling them to truck off. And I wonder if those were followed up by other messages essentially saying, seriously, go truck yourselves, you trucking shameless bunch of money-grabbing mother truckers. This guy, as you mentioned, Trevor Howarth,